My discussion today is really about a few stories, personal stories that have shaped my faith and really just chronicle, if you will, my faith journey. The name of the topic, Santa's Elves, I guess that needs some explaining. When I was a youngster, someone mentioned Long Island. I was born in Brooklyn, but before I was one, we actually did move out to Long Island. Anyway, in the neighborhood that I was in when I was about 6 years old, they actually still do it in the neighborhood that I live in now. We have a Christmas Santa. There's a Pinecrest Drive in my neighborhood, and it's called Pinecrest Santa in my neighborhood. But when I was about 5 or 6, we had a very similar thing. So a couple of Sundays before Christmas, Santa would come on a flatbed truck, and there were bells and ribbons and music, and all the kids would come out, and Santa would give gifts to the kids in the neighborhood. And I must have been getting a little bit older, but I remember this particular year turning to my mother and basically just saying, "Mom, how can Santa get to so many places?" You know? And so she turns and she says, "Well, Santa has many elves that help him out." So I was good with that. I'm still good with that, by the way. But in a similar way, I'm amazed at the number of places and the number of times that God has revealed himself through words, through actions of other people. Now, we don't tend to call them God's elves as much as I think we use the word angels very often. And I have been extremely blessed. I have been extremely blessed by the presence of so many angels in my life, not just carrying the gift of God's love, Agape, but very often carrying me, from one place to usually a much better place. The first two stories that I want to outline are really connected by a car accident and also by my mother, my most reoccurring angel. When I was a junior in high school, I went to a Catholic high school, much like a lot of you here, all of you here. And the high school was not in the town that I lived in. So anyway, as a junior in high school, I was one of the few in my class that had a car. I had a really cool car, by the way. I had a Volkswagen van, okay, which was really, really cool. It was cool except for the fact that the engine was in the back of the car. So more about that. But anyway, on a particular day, my car needed servicing, and I reached out to the only other boy I knew from my town that drove, and I said, "Hey, could you meet me here, drop my car off, and I'll drive to school with you?" So he said, "Sure." Now, on that particular day, there was a little bit of snow falling, so I waited for him for a while. He didn't show up, so I drove to his house, and sure enough, he said, "Well, because of the snow, my mother doesn't want me to drive." So I said, "Okay, no problem, come with me, and we'll just go to school." So we start to go, the only way I know how to go from, back to my house. He said, no, from here we go a different way. And so I'm driving down these roads that I'm not really familiar with. And we come to this one turn that goes down to the left, so I can't see what's coming either. But on the road that I was on, there was no stop sign, there was no yield sign. So I guess I just thought that this was the side road, coming in. So anyway, I proceed through the intersection. This other not as cool car with a big V8 engine in the front, this Lincoln Continental comes up. And anyway, we have this really horrific accident. And it's funny, at the time, you go into shock. And I kind of do remember him coming over to the car. And I'm thinking I'm going to get my wallet and we'll have a discussion. And then I hear Brian moaning, and I realize my leg is not normal. Ironically, there were a couple guys from the basketball team, I played basketball, who were behind me, and Billy came out, and he thought he would just help me out of the car. So he grabs me, and then we realized my leg's not coming with me. And so I kind of went in and out of consciousness, and I do remember that they brought the jaws of life and got us out of the car and eventually into an ambulance. And I remember this too. It's funny what you remember. as I'm in the ambulance going to the hospital, and there were young EMT folks helping out. And in my head, I'm thinking, when we get to the hospital and they wheel me out and I can see the doctor, he'll give me that sense of everything's all right. And so that almost happened. So we get to the hospital, they wheel me out, and sure enough, the doctor's face appears, and he looks nervous as hell. He didn't make me feel much better. So anyway, that's about all I remember from that day. I guess I was in intensive care. In addition to breaking my leg, I really slammed my head pretty hard at the windshield. And I was in and out of consciousness, in a coma, in intensive care for a couple of days. And I guess it was touch and go there for a while. But I remember one moment in that time that I was in intensive care, and there were tubes and this noise of an intensive care unit, and I just remember looking over to my right, the right of the bed, and my mother sitting there. Sorry about that. And with her rosary beads, and she was crying. And in that split second, and all it was about 10 seconds, I just remember the awesome feeling of somebody else being there with us. She was consoling me. I was consoling her. When you see your parents cry, your first instinct is to apologize. You must have done something wrong. And I think that was my reaction, and she said it's okay. And so anyway, I think in that moment we both knew that I was going to live and that things would be better. The second story, if you jump ahead, my recovery from that accident was very, very slow. I wound up spending 2.5 months in the hospital in traction. Traction is they put a pin through your shin and then they attach it to weights at the end of the bed. And so in my case, it was a broken femur, the femur between your knee and your hip. And so they put a lot of weights on, so the bone, so it goes like this, and then over time they decrease the weights, and the theory is that the bone would fuse together. So that took from February 8th till April 22nd before I got out of the hospital. And then I had a big body cast for a while, a smaller cast. And then somewhere around mid-June, I wound up getting the last cast off, and I was really looking forward to getting back in shape, and the idea of playing basketball my senior year was still out there. And around about the 4th of July weekend, I went to visit a friend, knocked on the door, nobody home, just went walking back to get in another car. And I slipped and broke the leg again. This time it kind of slid up. So when we got to the doctor, he said, well, you have 2 options. He said, we could put you back in traction and start all over again. And I said, what's option 2? He said, option 2, you could just live with the shortness because your hip and your knee are aligned. It's not like we're... So I went for option 2. Some of you notice on all of my shoes I have a lift, and that's why. To be honest, I'm very thankful. This was many years ago that I had this, that I haven't had a back problem, since then. So, but the point of this second story is something I'm really not proud of is my response to all of this that was going on. My senior year became very, very unhealthy, very, very unproductive. And I remember when it ended, I said to my parents, yeah, college, not for me. I've got this job at the deli. I'm good. And my father had another idea. He said, no, we're going to drive around upstate New York, look at all the SUNY schools, and you're going to pick one. And that's what got me to upstate New York, is I did wind up selecting Brockport. And but my first year and a half there were no more productive and no more healthy than what my high school years were about. I was just very lost. I was very far from God, very depressed. And I remember one conversation having with my mother at this time, and I was probably giving her the woe is me. And she said, well, why don't you go to the local parish and see if they need CYO basketball coaches? So I kind of filtered what most parents say to kids when you're at college. And but sure enough, a couple weeks later, I found myself for the first time going to Mass in the local parish out there in Brockport. And sure enough, I pick up the bulletin. We need anybody interested in CYO basketball coaching, give this man a call. And so it sounds like a very simple idea, but it really did change my life. It probably saved my life. Just given the opportunity to get into a gym, I forgot how much I had missed that. And the other thing it did was it gave me an opportunity to work with children for the first time. And I found out that I really enjoyed that as well. So it wasn't, like a lightning bolt. It took a little bit of time, but things just started to improve. My grades started to get a lot better. I just started to feel much healthier about myself. I met a girl who would become my wife. And so I just think back to that very simple comment that my mother made, and how powerful that wound up becoming, how profound that wound up becoming in my life. So the third story, if you could jump ahead now maybe 4 or 5 years, Pam and I did get married. She always knew what she wanted to be. She wanted to be a teacher. She's still an elementary school teacher up in Hilton. And she pretty much encouraged me to pursue that as well. But I couldn't find a teaching job when I came out of school, and I wound up working for IBM, which turned out to be 11 years working with IBM. So 5 years from about the time I finished school, our son Danny was born in November of '91. I should mention that Pam's mom passed a few months later. Joan had battled cancer her whole life and succumbed to it in, I guess that would be February of '92. And then in '93, early '93, Pam was pregnant again, and August of '93, she felt that there was a lump on her throat. And so we went to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, you're pregnant and your body's changing, and I wouldn't worry about it. And there was probably a little bit in my head thinking that she's overly worried because her mom passed. But anyway, a couple weeks go by, and Pam says, I think this got bigger. So this time we went to a specialist, took a biopsy, and I remember getting the phone call on a Friday afternoon. I was working. I had one of the early cell phones, this monstrous thing. You thought you were so cool, an antenna on the car. But anyway, I get this phone call from the doctor, and he says, your wife has cancer. So I had to go home and talk to Pam about that. And, she was so strong, and we realized that, the focus right now had to be on the baby, and there was nothing we could do in the meantime anyway. We couldn't have treatment done. We had to wait. So it was kind of a nerve-wracking time, but on October 19th, Megan was born. And a couple weeks later, Pam started treatment, 12 months of chemo and radiation, and she lost all of her beautiful blonde hair. She got down to about 90 pounds. And you're probably wondering, well, where's the face of God in this story? And really the face of God was right in front of me, every day. I was working for IBM at the time, and I wasn't home a lot. I was traveling a lot. So, here's Pam going through treatment, raising a newborn, and a 2-year-old as well. So I remember that I was not angry at God. I felt that I needed him so much that I just found myself never praying any harder than I did, during that time. Anyway, knock on wood, 25 years later, Megan's fine, Pam's fine. I still get to have coffee with her every morning, and and it's a real blessing. The last story is a quick one, and it really has to do with how I got here to McQuaid. In the neighborhood that I live in, West Irondequoit, around the corner from my house, there's a house that several priests live in. Many of them you know. Father Jack Healy, Father Joe DeMeo, Father Brian Murphy, Carmelite priests. And I think the history is that there was a high school in Auburn, New York, that closed, that the Carmelites were running, and many of the Carmelites had to find other things, and Father Brian, Father Joe, and Father Jack all came to work at McQuaid. But this is way before that. This is maybe about 5 years after Pam's treatments, and probably a little bit to do with Pam's treatments. I decided that if I was going to teach, I better, give it a shot before the window closes in terms of, time. So my first job that I got teaching was in Bloomfield, New York. And it was an assignment that the teacher I was replacing was taking a 3-year sabbatical. She was a 26-year veteran math teacher that was considering whether she wanted to go into administration. So anyway, what worked out great for me was not only the opportunity to teach, but her job was to help new math teachers. And she worked out of the building that I was in. So I had a lot of her support, and I'm forever grateful for what she gave to me. But anyway, I knew I had 3 years, to teach there. So the summer is coming to an end after I finished 1 year at Bloomfield, and Father Brian Murphy was a walker. He used to walk a lot in my neighborhood. It's funny you mentioned the Bronx. Father Brian was from the Bronx. He liked to tell you he's from the Bronx. He liked to tell you stories from the Bronx. And the first time that I met him, he said to me right away, he said, "What part of Brooklyn are you from?" And I said, "Hey, I've spent 25 years up here trying to get rid of my Brooklyn accent, But anyway, he picked right up on it. We became pretty good friends, and we would talk to each other in the neighborhood when we saw each other. So anyway, this particular Tuesday morning, I'm putting the garbage out. He walks by. I'm all ready to go to Bloomfield to teach another year. But I had seen an ad in the paper that some high school named Aquinas was hiring a math teacher. Now, I didn't grow up in Rochester, so I didn't know anything about Aquinas. I didn't know anything about McQuaid. All I knew was Bloomfield and how to get there. Anyway, Father Brian walks by, and I said to him, "Now, Father, you teach at Aquinas, right?" And he seemed very offended by that. He said, "No, I teach at McQuaid." Okay, I didn't know anything. So we got to talking, and he said, "I thought you were working for IBM." I said, "Yeah, I was, but I've changed to teaching." And he said, "We need a math teacher." And I'm like, okay. And I thought he was just being nice. He said, "Yeah, we need a math teacher at McQuaid. You call this man, you call the principal, and I think you'll have the opportunity." So I said, "Okay, Father, I'll do that." He says, "No, go in the house right now. Go in the house and call." And sure enough, I went in, I called, and I guess they had a math teacher signed up to come on board who backed out the day before. So the very next day I came in, I interviewed with a couple of different people, and next thing I know, it's 20 years later, and I'm teaching here at McQuaid. So I just wanted to give you those 4 stories, very simple stories really, but just as a reminder to you that sometimes you don't know how your words, simple as they may be at times, can be extremely profound. And sometimes our actions can be just as profound as they were for me. I selected those stories because they were very meaningful, very impactful to me. I could have chosen from a lot more. And since I've been here at McQuaid, I've met many, many angels, many of them who are here, and many of them who have retired and have moved on. So anyway, I'll leave you with the last line of one of the greatest plays, in my opinion. It's the play Les Mis, and I don't know if you know the last line of the play. I don't know if Mr. Shute is here. I'm sure he would know the last line of the play. But to love another person is to see the face of God. So, as I said, I've been very blessed to be carried by angels throughout my life. And I feel very honored, very humbled to be here with you today and to be able to share that. So thanks very much, and have a Merry Christmas.